the benefits of learning about these experiences are immense. Like for me, it completely turned my life around. And I tell people that near-death experiences saved my life because they gave me a reason that humanity up until, this point has not given.
Today, I'd like to welcome Ned Matinnia to the show. Welcome, Ned. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you.
I'm so excited to have this conversation with you. I discovered you on Facebook, and then I discovered that you created a Facebook group for near-death experiences that's over 160,000 members. So to me, that is just mind-blowing and amazing. And I'm so excited to talk to you today about all things around near-death experiences. But first, I want to know, have you had a near-death experience?
It's interesting that I don't have any conscious memories of one. However, multiple people who are intuitive, including experiencers, told me I've had one, and it probably happened as I was an infant. I think several weeks old, and I've actually asked my mom about it. She said that she doesn't exactly remember anything, but also a very accurate medium last year told me that when I was in the womb, the cord probably wrapped around my neck or something like that. So, I don't have any memories of it, but it's interesting that multiple people told me that that I've had one, and that also my energy feels like I've had one, and like I actually feel that I can relate a lot more to experiencers than average people.
Yeah, that's fascinating that there's no conscious memory. And the medium told you that the umbilical cord could have been wrapped around your neck. And from my experience watching near-death experiencers tell their stories, or people who have had pre-birth experiences, when we're in the womb, aren't we so close to that side that the near-death experiencers experience?
Yeah. And like I actually wonder if perhaps if I had an experience like after that, perhaps a fever or something. Like I also had an abusive father who even when I was extremely young, sometimes was physically abusive when angry. And so I'm curious if there was an instance, like that. But also something that's interesting as well is that many child experiencers have a hard time relating to children because it's almost like they grow up in terms of maturity, even as a child. And I definitely felt that in terms of like I didn't relate to many kids' games or whatnot, because I was looking at the earth and space and like how animals are and people are on the world, and kind of like observing everything on a different level. And so I actually grew up watching NASA videos about astronauts and nature and science, even very little. And so and what's interesting is that a lot of experiencers talk about how connected like the earth is to the stars and cosmos, and experiencers often have a deeper relationship or a reverence to nature, and I've always felt that too.
Yeah, that's interesting. That reminds me of a story I heard from a near-death experiencer, and she was talking about how she could see the truth and the life of trees and how much wisdom that the trees have. And so that's really awesome that, you just kind of connected the two. I'm curious if you didn't remember having having a conscious memory of an NDE, what was it that motivated you to create this group about near-death experiences?
Um, people people often ask that, and the answer is like I truly, even as a teenager, I needed a reason to live. Like I felt that people's explanations of being here, whether religious or scientific, didn't exactly answer everything. In terms of science, especially at that time during the 90s, mainstream science was actually more atheistic or materialistic in terms of thinking and teaching that we are an accident on Earth of a random evolution, and that the only things which are real are physical. So our brains and our bodies are basically creating an illusion of a consciousness, but it isn't actually real. And still today, that is the most popular theory in science, is that our consciousness is an illusion and it isn't actually real. And so your question, I'm trying to remember you, about.
Was it like, what was the spark or the inspiration if you did not have a conscious memory of a near-death experience? What motivated you to create a group about it?
And so after so long in high school, and I actually felt as if middle school and high school in particular, to me, I felt like a prison, only because I didn't have friends. I was extremely shy, extremely because of the abusive childhood I had and the emotional imprint on me. I was afraid of other people, and so over time I realized it's because of all that, and so I've been healing all that. But because of feeling alienated, not having friends or a sense of purpose on Earth, I wanted answers. And when science, it basically told us that we are a random accident, because I recall in my high school, I took a biology class and I learned about evolution, and I've always had an interest in science. And so I thought, well, that explains it. We're were just a random accident. There isn't a purpose. I needed a reason to be here, and because there didn't seem to be one, I thought that well, I can just leave early, and I I kind of looked into that, and before I did that, I started a search for answers, and so I looked up religions. I looked at the Bible. I learned about the Eastern religions and the Vedas, Upanishads in India, and I wanted to see what the experts from all the different areas and histories said, and it's interesting that love is a common if you look at all the religions, and some other core principles about what you do to others will impact yourself. But even with all this, it didn't exactly answer the question. And then I saw or I think it was either I read Life After Life by Raymond Moody, and it was a huge eye-opener. And as soon as I learned about near-death experiences, I felt like it had the answers that were not in religion or science. Like it kind of abridged all that. And after I had that, I didn't have a reason to think about suicide anymore, because every experience, they basically say your life is precious, you're here for a reason. And so I internalized that, and I got excited because it basically meant that our actions and words here do matter. Because for a long time growing up, I felt like our actions don't ultimately matter, because I saw people who were often popular but mean get away with it. I saw people who people weren't ultimately the authority I thought. And so I started the group because initially it was a small thing. Like I felt I wanted a place, especially on Facebook, to share our articles and videos on YouTube, links, any conversations about this, because I thought near-death experiences are like a hugely underappreciated treasure. It's like, here's the answers that people needed, and yet many people never even heard about them, or thought that they were just hallucinations, or fanciful ideas. So ultimately I created it because I wanted a place to put evidence and articles, and just over time it basically took off on its own.
Yeah.
No, it's a long answer.
That. That is so that's so fascinating, and there were so many details in your story that I wanted to pick apart. But something that you just said really stood out to me, so I'm going to go in that direction instead. So you said that many people can think that the NDEs are hallucinations. I'm curious because I know I've heard and read, but I'm not a researched person. Like I do research, but I don't like dive in all the way. But I have heard that there have been studies on NDEs to prove that they're not hallucinations. And so I'm curious what you might have to say about that.
Oh, exactly. I totally I call myself a scientist. And so even though I'm not an official scientist, I definitely have the mindset of a scientist. And my day job is actually software engineering, which is also a part of science. But I love the researchers who are actually taking these experiences seriously, including Dr. Bruce Grayson, who he has a book out, which I think was out several years ago or sooner, and it's called I think it's just called After, and it's about his story from the 1970s, actually, as a doctor. I think he was either a psychologist or a psychiatrist, and he might have had other titles as well. And he had patients who basically observed and told him things that were happening that were impossible for them to know. So over time, he got curious about this, and he actually formed IANDs with several other people, including Dr. Raymond Moody. And so he is one of the pioneers of this research. And so, yeah, I definitely have an interest in evidence and data, because so many people have ideas or beliefs that aren't accurate. Like, what if I told everyone that tomorrow an asteroid will impact us and kill everyone? People could believe it, but would it actually happen? And probably not. And so you have to figure out a way of knowing which ideas or information are accurate and which aren't. And so when it comes to like the idea about hallucinations, over and over for decades, the studies show that near-death experiences are not the same as hallucinations, including even how people remember them. Their memories are often even sharper and clearer than their normal life. If you think about a person who had like a dream or a hallucination 10 years ago, they would have a hard time even recalling that. And if they recalled it, it would probably be changed over time and kind of, vague. But near-death experiences, even after many decades, people almost always talk about how it's a very clear, strong memory, and it doesn't change either.
Yeah. That is my experience when I listen to people share their near-death experience, is that it's a recall of something that like happened yesterday, and they recall it in that manner. And I'm curious because I'm imagining, I'm pretty 100% sure that you've done a ton more research and have had way more exposure to near-death experiences than I have. And in my experience, when I listen to these stories, there are so many similarities across the board. From people that have never met each other and around things that they've felt or seen or experienced. I'm curious if you would share some of those common themes or common experiences that a lot of them seem to share similarly in their stories.
Sure, yeah. A major one is meeting loved ones, including friends or relatives, or even people who had like a teacher as a child will sometimes meet them, and who the person meets is often about their connection in terms of if it was a close one, or if the person who's in spirit has a connection to the person even without the person knowing it. Um, and what's interesting is that my grandfather died when I was little, and so I only had met him a few times because I grew up in California. He was on the East Coast, but I found out through mediums over time that even though I hardly knew him or remembered him, like he was present almost every time. And so if we can imagine that we have loved ones who are watching over us who we don't even realize. And so I'm excited about that. But to answer your question, so meeting loved ones is a strong thing, including them telling the person that it isn't their time, and kind of encouraging them back. And Anita Morjani, her story is like that. She died very fearful and kind of afraid of others' opinions of her. And in her experience, her deceased friend who passed, I think, 2 years earlier, met her, and her father, who passed away 10 years earlier, also met her. And they both encouraged her to return to Earth and live completely different, to live fearlessly and in her own heart and in her own sense of who she is, because up until then she had only lived for others. And so I say this as an example of a meeting loved ones, but also being told messages that are personal about, like, that a person needs to hear, to either help them or heal them in some way. And also experiencers are sometimes even told messages for everyone in terms of, like, about the earth or about treating each other. Chris Batts, actually, he had an NDE due to a suicide attempt, and he met God, or the higher power, and basically God's message was about how he loves everyone, including the people that we think are criminals or are bad, like everyone without exception. And Chris was actually told, go back and tell them that I love all of them, and that you don't have to be perfect. You don't have to do anything. Like, love is intrinsic, and we can't ever lose it. And I'll say that, but I'll also add, it doesn't mean that, okay, we can do anything we want, or we can, like, hurt others, because we also, experiencers learn that we are accountable for our actions, but it isn't about, like, an eternal heaven or hell punishment. It's in a different way. And so a lot of experiencers talk about how they felt like the higher power or powers view us and treat us almost like loving parents, and that just as children sometimes hurt each other or make messes, we do that, but it's okay. It's not like in eternal punishment.
Yeah. That, what you just talked about is, I think, the number one thing for me that helps me remember when I am watching or listening to or reading a near-death experience. It's that it's all okay. We're okay. And it leads me to another curiosity that I've noticed and I've only really watched podcasts. I've read some articles, but I've watched a lot of podcast episodes on near-death experiences. And something that is pretty common across the board that they experience when they do die is a life review. I'm curious what you've learned about life reviews.
Um, uh, these are actually one of my favorite subjects, because of how, what's interesting is that people talk about, it's almost like, or it is like, everything is recorded, but it isn't even recorded by like a camera or a video camera. It's like if you could picture like a 3D hologram that's like recording everything. People talk about how in their life reviews, they actually could count the number of mosquitoes were in the air at a time, like, or it's so fascinating. But also, one of the reasons I'm so interested in them is because they are where we can actually learn the most from our lives and about them, and they are often the a major thing that actually causes a lot of experiencers to come back and completely change their ways, especially if they had a habit of bullying others or being mean or overly selfish. Oftentimes, when a person has a life review and comes back, they really change because they realize how connected we are, animals are, everything. And I've seen people talk about how they are afraid of it. They're like, oh, well, if I'm going to have my life review, it'll be painful. And what I'll say is that experiencers have said it can be painful because there are times when we have hurt others intentionally, or been mean, or even hurt ourselves, in terms of not making the most loving choices. But something I'll say is that it isn't about like tallying up your scores of, if you were loving 8 times and you hurt people 10 times. It's about learning why things happened and what is important. And when I say that, because we think about like we all have to live in an economy, we all have to have cars or homes, or most of us, and a lot of people think that these are what people should do. I mean, accumulate wealth, be that if a person has a lot of wealth, and that person is basically the pinnacle of everything. And even if they have treated others horribly, or they don't have a strong connection to other people, a life reviews show us how the little things actually matter most, including when you rescued an animal which was injured, or you helped a person who was being picked on. We always have to remember that, like, our bank accounts or our material objects are not what come after us. If near-death experiences are teaching us that life does go on, certain things here matter more. And oftentimes experiencers will talk about how two things matter most. It's the love that we shared and created, also what we learned. So learning is important. One experiencer actually said, we take those with us. Yeah.
Gosh, all of this is just so juicy. I like don't even know which direction to go because I could talk about every part of what you just said forever and ever. So for me, like what you just explained, one of the ways that these near-death experiences, people sharing them, have helped me is like exactly what you just said. There's a bigger purpose. It's not just about the money or, you know, the car or the house or the status or whatever. There's a deeper meaning about relationships and connection. At least that's how I interpret it. And like they've helped me to just expand like my view of the purpose that we have here. And also, I think you may have mentioned this as well, but what they did for me was show us that the person with a ton of money, the president, that celebrity, there's no distinction. We are all made of the same stuff. So it helped me tremendously because I tend to put people on a pedestal and everyone's better than me. And when I interview, I interviewed Christian Sundberg, who had his pre-birth memories.
Actually, and I'll add here.
Yeah.
That's actually how I found you.
Yeah, I noticed that's who we had as the mutual connection. When I interviewed him, and that's a really amazing story for another time because we're gonna run out of time. But when I interviewed him, he was sharing how we are, when we're on the other side and we have that life review, we know who we are. Like the life review shows us who we are and we know who we are, but we do see some of the impact of our choices. So he could see how he actually was going to reincarnate and then he changed his mind. And so because he changed his mind, he catalyzed a miscarriage. And so in his life review for that life, he could see how the miscarriage impacted the mother and the ripple effect that it had on everyone else. However, from that view, it wasn't like self-deprecating or like beating himself up, like I'm such a bad person because I caused this much pain, you know, but he could just see it from a more expanded view. Life reviews are totally fascinating. And I know we're a little bit limited on time. So I want to jump back a little bit because I feel like there's so much benefit that I've received. And I know you have, and I've heard of others receiving these benefits as well from listening to near-death experiences. Can you share what are the benefits?
The benefits of learning about these experiences are immense. Like for me, it completely turned my life around. And I tell people that near-death experiences saved my life because they gave me a reason that humanity up until, this point has not given. Because if you ask a lot of scientists, they'll basically say, well, there is no purpose. We're here. And, and after we die, then that's it. And so in my mind, being a very practical or pragmatic person, I thought, well, then if everyone's memories are going to ultimately be completely erased and there isn't any purpose, then like it often leads to people in society how it is, where people are chasing after power or fame or possessions and hurting each other to do that, all the while not realizing that I don't want to say it's a wasted effort, but it's like when they die or they review everything, they will see that like the hurt that they cause others, they will also feel themselves, and so ultimately, like a lot of experiencers return knowing that they don't want to hurt any others because it's ultimately hurting them. But more to your question about benefits, like I'll say it's basically gives me a reason to try and to know that what I do and say matters and has an impact. I call near-death experiences and studying them and sharing the information my biggest passion, because I have a day job which is completely unrelated, and it's easy to sometimes get lost in people or the politics of people, and forget that there is a higher power and there is a deeper purpose for being here. And something I'll also add is that I often talk about near-death experiences and mediums similarly, because they kind of connect with each other. And oftentimes the messages or the learnings that we experience in NDEs and the learnings from observing and having a mediumship readings are supporting each other. And so in terms of the benefits, I feel like it gives me a sense of not just optimism, but inspiration about life, even the challenges, because a lot of experiences or experiencers will say that in their life reviews, they realize the values of the uncomfortable parts.
Yeah. That reminds me of, I've lived a life of a lot of challenges. And I actually, so I've not had a near-death experience in the sense that I died and got to experience life on the other side, but I did in 2012 take 4 bottles of pills in an attempt to kill myself. And all that happened was I didn't die. I blacked out for a couple of days, woke up in a psych ward, but I had a channel who was a dear friend come to my house, and we did this session. I don't know, I'm still oblivious to part of what was going on at that time. But when I came out of that experience, I realized that I had a problem with alcohol and drugs, and that catalyzed me to get sober. It took another year after that. But so when I hear stories of people who have had these near-death experiences, it reminds me how precious our life actually is, and how really in the bigger picture of life or reality, because I don't know if life is the right word that fits here, but especially when we start pulling in past lives, it's like this lifetime that we're living right here is like just a small blip in time. And really our souls are eternal, and we we actually choose to come to this time-space reality. And for me, that's probably the number one thing, because I will be completely transparent and vulnerable here and say that I, for a very long time, felt like a victim. Why am I here? I don't want to be here. So much so that I tried to leave. I get a lot of comfort in those, but it's like, oh yeah, like we wanted this experience. We want this experience. And that I think is so valuable. I'm curious how that impacts you.
Yeah, for sure. Like I've heard experiencers who have talked about how even like souls, like you can picture them lined up and wanting to come to Earth and to get a chance. And there are some experiencers who talk about this specifically, like Danian.
I just want to stop you and like just highlight that. That for anyone who's listening, who's on this planet, who doesn't want to be, there are souls lined up wanting to come here to experience the contrast that this reality has to offer. Okay, I didn't mean to interrupt, but I just felt like what you said was so important to be said again. Please continue.
And so Danian Brinkley, who had his own experience, or actually I think he has died a total of 4 times, because after he was hit by lightning in 1975, I think, he had his first experience, which completely changed him. But he talks about how he learned that we chose to come here, and we were also chosen. And so we have to have, so everyone on Earth, you can picture, one had an agreement or contract or an interest in coming here, and then they were also picked in a sense of like, okay, there's a particular role or body opportunity that fits that particular soul's interest or a plan, because we all have different plans as well. There are people who come here to experience poverty or hardship, with the goal of overcoming it. There are people who agreed to come into a extremely wealthy, pampered, a baby body, and oftentimes people who have things too easy for their whole lives become extremely depressed and empty. It's actually a really challenging thing in its own right. So we all have different themes for our lives, and we come here on purpose. It's a hard place. A lot of people will talk about how easy it is in spirit or other planets, perhaps. Like it's so comfortable, it's so warm, enjoyable. But Mellon Thomas Benedict, who also had an NDE from a brain tumor, and he actually, before his NDE, he was extremely cynical, and he thought humanity was hopeless. He saw how we treated each other and treated the earth, which I also previously felt like this. Like I care about the earth, but I know that we have help. But anyway, in terms of Mellon, so he died extremely cynical, without any hope. In his NDE, he was basically shown how Earth, like a hard planet like Earth, is where actual progress happens. It is where the rubber meets the road. So he, in his own words, he said he wanted to return, even as comfortable as he was in spirit, because he knew he would have a chance to actually work on himself and improve things. And so he came back in hospice because of his cancer. Everyone completely thought that it was over for him, including himself. And so when he woke up in hospice, he completely shocked the people there. And I think it was after 90 minutes of being out, and he woke up and he started basically whispering, "I love my life. I love my life. I love my life." Because he also, I think he was told that he would have an opportunity to be born into a new baby, a life, or he could have his existing life. And so when he came back, he was thankful that he didn't have to start over, and that he could have his time here to improve himself. So yeah, it's a lot. I forget your
That's
exact.
beautiful. I don't remember, and I think it's okay. I'm just so into, like, I'm just so present to what you're saying that I can't even remember what I asked. So it's all good. And that I'm really curious, because this has, watching NDEs talk about their experience has alleviated a lot of fear that I've had growing up in a religious household, in a Catholic household. When I see what they experience, it's, to me, I get this sense that there is no hell. However, I have seen that there are some who have died and experienced hell. I'm curious, what would you have to say about that?
Yeah, I was actually thinking of asking if you were going to ask this earlier, because it's important. A lot of people wonder about it. In fact, in the near-death experiences group, it's probably one of the most common questions. You have a lot of people who have grown up around religion, who have been taught for so long about hell, and they're asking, experiencers, hey, did you experience that? And yes, some experiencers have, but I will add, for one thing, hell is a concept, or as a word, we relate it to the common religious idea that hell means an eternal punishment directly from God. And so it's easy for people to be led or misunderstood, because we think, oh, I went to a scary experience that must have been hell, that must have been eternal punishment. That isn't what experiencers talk about. Like, a lot of experiencers who start off in a scary or unpleasant place, there are other triggers for that, including a lot of people who had their experience because of a lot of drugs, whether illegal or like in the hospital, or illegal. That will often cause a strange experiences, at least at the beginning. Then over time, as the person moves out of that, oftentimes the light comes, and things change. There are people who started off in a scary place and then asked for help, and it comes, and either through a Jesus or loved ones or angels, guides. A common theme is that if a person is in an unpleasant or scary place, asking for help is huge, and almost always changes everything. And so there's a point about this, that a lot of people who observe other people or beings in hell, or these realms, it's because they are so in their own ego that they don't want to ask for help, and so because of that, their own stubbornness keeps them there. I also want to add Angie Fenimore, who had her experience, I think it was in the 90s, or slightly after that. But in her experience, she talks about it, and even at the IANS conference, I saw her in 2016, I think, in Orlando, and she talked about how her experience started off in hell, or in a very dark, scary place. And I forget if it started out as a suicide attempt or not. But in her experience, she talks about how ultimately it was the best thing that ever happened to her, because it made her face all of her emotions and her anger and her a negative energy, and she actually worked through it on the other side, and then eventually came out into the light. And when she woke up here on earth, had a completely changed outlook. And so about hell, if you hear people talking about it, one, it isn't about a religious idea of eternal punishment. It's more about facing our own issues or fears or trauma. And the more humble we are, and if we ask for help, it will come.
Thank you so much for articulating it that way. I just want to add on to this that my experience growing up was I was so afraid of doing anything wrong that I was going to go to hell. And of course, I'm human, so I made mistakes all the time. But after I got sober, after a good year, maybe a little bit more of recovery, I realized that heaven and hell are real because I created my own hell here on earth. And now I am creating my own heaven. Thank you so much for that. This has been so much fun. I wish that I had like 3 or 4 more hours just to pick your brain on, all of this stuff. I have so many questions that I haven't gotten to ask, but I trust that everything that was said here was perfectly orchestrated. I do have a couple of questions that I ask all my guests. So the first question is, how would you define God?
God, after everything that I've learned and experienced, is, if you picture the most loving, caring, and sweet mother, also the most powerful, protective father, and also a killer sense of humor, and you put like everything in one. God is real. And that's what NDE experiencers will often talk about, that there is a higher power. It knows everything about us. It isn't a man or a woman or an animal. It's beyond names. And yeah, it does have a humor, because oftentimes we think of something stern and cold, but no, it loves us, and we are actually its children.
I love that answer. Thank you so much. The second question is, what would you say is the purpose of life?
The purpose of life here on earth is growth, experiencing things, adventure, like, I guess ultimately what experiencers talk about is that in a spirit, it's easy, because it's almost like we have our intellect, our minds, and so we know how love is the answer. And then earth is almost like a field trip, or like a place we actually have to, or we can choose to live it. And so here is where we actually express what we know. And it's hard. And what a lot of the experiencers have said, it's hard intentionally. Like, if it was easy, there are millions of other places to just chill and take it easy. Here, it's kind of like a more advanced a class. And so growth, adventure.
That's awesome. Okay, the final question is, if you could take one piece of wisdom that you have now and offer it to a younger version of yourself, what would that one piece of wisdom be?
I would say trust your own feelings, and it's okay to relax more. Because I would often put so much pressure on myself, and I would look to others for answers, and even experiences echo this, that and just being is okay. Like, you don't have to try so hard to fit anything.
I love that. Thank you so much. I will include a link to the group, his near-death experience group. So I'm a member. It's amazing. There's so many great stories. If you're interested and you're not already in it, please go join. How do people get a hold of you?
So on Facebook, mainly. Also, on LinkedIn, I'm on there. And yeah, and if you're ever on Facebook, I'm in the NDE group. See me there.
Awesome. This has been so much fun. Thank you so much for being who you are, for following your passion and your interests, and for creating a platform that is helping and has helped and impacted so many, many, many souls in such a positive way. It's been such an honor to spend this time with you. Thank you so much, Ned.
Same.
I would like to personally thank you for tuning in to this episode. If you haven't already, please be sure to like this episode, subscribe to my channel, and turn on notifications so that you never miss a beat. And if you really resonated with this content, please share it with all of your friends so that collectively we can expand our consciousness. Have a very blessed week.